Knoxville, Tennessee, a popular destination for people moving looking for affordability. But it's starting to get so expensive in Knoxville that it really isn't an affordable option anymore, is it? It seems like the cost of living in affordable places today is almost on par with the places people are starting to leave, making these types of affordable options less attractive. On today's video, we're going to talk about if Knoxville, Tennessee is still an option. A lot of people fleeing the Carolinas, New York, and Florida in particular are all heading to Knoxville, Tennessee with the notion that it's more affordable. And it is if you're buying real estate. But if you're renting, it doesn't seem to offer that much of an advantage. On top of that, there's a lot of problems in eastern Tennessee, and those problems are only getting worse as other states change their laws or as real estate gets more expensive in other places and jobs don't catch up. More people still consider moving to Knoxville for a relatively better standard of living because of affordability in wages, even though that gap is starting to close. Located in the eastern part of Tennessee, Knoxville to the east is surrounded by mountains, and that is what a lot of people leaving Florida want. But eastern Tennessee has to compete with North Carolina and North Georgia, other popular destinations for people leaving the state of Florida. And how do people in Knoxville feel about these newcomers?
Way too many are way too fast. The rich people are buying off the middle class houses and running the poor people after renting them out in small apartments, just running them completely out. Well, the one that's coming here, the one that's coming and buying up the property and paying all these Mexicans to come in, like 5 men for the wage of 2 men's work, you know what I mean? And just, they making a killing and people losing their homes, jobs, and everything else because of it.
So I found it interesting that he thinks the people that are leaving Florida are rich, when in reality, the people that are leaving Florida are the ones that can't afford Florida anymore. But that should just give you a perspective on poverty in eastern Tennessee, that the poor people leaving Florida because they can't afford Florida anymore are perceived as being rich. That's just to give you an idea of how much poverty there is in eastern Tennessee, that they view our poor people that are being forced out as the rich people. Referring to Hispanics leaving Florida as Mexicans, Mexicans are not even among the top 4 largest group of Hispanics in Florida. Could this be just out of ignorance? But a lot of times it's disrespect. They know they're not Mexicans, but they refer to all Hispanics as Mexicans as a form of disrespect. So this should just give you an idea, if you're moving to the Knoxville area, how ignorant or disrespectful the locals are when it comes to dealing with outsiders, referring to all Hispanics as Mexicans, and outright letting you know that they don't like the people that are moving here because they feel that they're buying out everything. They think you're rich. And when I moved to Alabama, which is not too far away from Tennessee, it's in their neighboring states after all, I dealt with this problem that the locals felt like I was a rich person buying them out simply because my standard of living wasn't absolute misery. So many times, if you're moving to Knoxville for affordability, you're not exactly rich. But just so you understand the perspective of the locals, from their point of view, you are rich. So to sum it up, it really isn't a welcoming place. Appalachian people have long been known for their hostilities of outsiders. And if you're moving to Knoxville, don't expect a grand welcoming. The people here really resent your presence. That in itself would make me question, why would I move here? But in case you're still going to continue with moving here, let's go on with the rest of today's video. Now, eastern Tennessee is the region of the country with the highest overdose death rate. That is shared with Kentucky, tip of North Carolina, and of course, West Virginia and Ohio. So this tip of the Appalachian Mountains that spans eastern Tennessee, lots of homelessness. Now, I talked to this gentleman here, got his life story, and he seemed to be awfully depressed. In fact, I don't think I've met homeless people in Florida this depressed and hopeless as well. So the situation in eastern Tennessee is bad. Some of these counties' overdose death rates are approaching nearly 100 per 100,000. Knoxville, it's very high. As I walked around this homeless camp, which is right in downtown, talking to people, there are 400 to 500 people just in downtown Knoxville that are homeless. Now, if you do the math of Knoxville's population, that lets you know that the homeless situation here is on par with the worst in the country. Interestingly enough, a lot of people that are leaving places like Oregon, California, Washington believe that if they come to Tennessee, they're going to find that some of those problems, which they relate to the politics of the West Coast, they believe that the politics of the West Coast is what's led to that problem. We'll find that in Tennessee, the situation is not only worse by number of people that are homeless per capita, but there's something even more sinister, is that this region of the country has the highest drug overdose death rates of anywhere. Needle caps literally everywhere on the ground here as an indication of how bad the problem is. And if you're going to find yourself anywhere in Appalachia, it's a huge problem. Knoxville is part of that region of the country where addiction has just taken a massive toll on the community. But there are some things to love about the Appalachian Mountains. For one, its scenic natural beauty, near perfect weather. It's cold enough to get snow, but not cold enough to where you're freezing the entire year. You get to see a perfect change of seasons here, and a quite beautiful one at that with the mountains. If you enjoy nature, trails, camping, and outdoor activities throughout the year, a variety of different activities are available, making this an attractive area for people who enjoy the outdoors. I personally love mountains, hiking, trails, creeks, rivers, all of that. And just about every time I find myself in eastern Tennessee, I always do a little exploration. Lots of national parks and places for you to enjoy nature. So if you're the outdoorsy type of person, there's definitely plenty of options to do in eastern Tennessee. I don't have a lot of footage of those activities because a lot of it is in the national parks. And as you guys know, you cannot really record video in the national parks and use it for YouTube channel purposes because of a new law that's taken place. If you're not aware of that, now you know. Regardless, every time I find myself in eastern Tennessee, we always take a little extra time to enjoy those activities. And that's probably one of the greatest draws of this area. The mountains really do offer a lot of recreational activities. Literally, a drive in any direction out of Knoxville should put you in some beautiful places to explore. And the change of seasons and scenery just prolongs all the different experiences you can have out here. A lot of people in Florida get tired of the beaches and move to the mountains. So a lot of Floridians living in this southern part of Appalachia, and they come here for these mountains. Absolutely beautiful. You know, from what I can tell, jobs are not too bad up here. There definitely seems to be work available, and life isn't so expensive that you need to make a lot of money. It's really much more affordable living in general versus some of these other states. So with enough jobs and affordability, it seems like, of course, that would draw people to move here. Now, of course, Knoxville isn't Miami or Las Vegas, but it's big enough to have just about everything you would want or need from a metropolitan area. The nightlife here doesn't seem incredible. The culture doesn't seem incredible. It's more of a affordable, laid-back town in the mountains. So if you're looking for Las Vegas or Miami, you probably aren't going to find that type of life here. It's really a laid-back city. And frankly, kind of everywhere you go in Knoxville, you see homelessness everywhere. So it doesn't really have a fancy, glittery vibe. It's without a doubt a poor area. But I do feel like a lot of the poverty here is inherently the fact that the people that live here have low education and just haven't applied themselves properly. I feel like a lot of people that move here are more successful, not because they're from a much better background or they're rich like the locals would want to think, but just simply they apply themselves better. And a lot of people that are here are just kind of stuck here in kind of laziness, lack of effort, lack of goals and aspirations. Like I said, when I talk to the homeless population here, they seem like the most hopeless people I've ever met. Where like the homeless people in Florida, you can talk to them about trying to leave the streets, their future, they just have a better context to them. They have more goals, they have more desire to get out there. But I tell you what, man, the homeless people that I talk to here in Knoxville, they feel like they're so lost into the streets that they're never actually going to be able to get back. And the most interesting thing about it is there's jobs, there's opportunity, there's not as much prejudice in the workplace from what I can perceive, and it's more affordable. All that would indicate that it's actually easier for them here in Knoxville to get off the streets than for the people in Florida, where jobs are more prejudiced, less jobs, lower paying jobs, and of course, higher cost of living and housing and more requirements for housing in Florida. It's actually easier for the homeless people in Florida to get off the streets, but they're more desperate here. And I talked to several homeless people, some on camera. I interviewed quite a few as well on camera. I might have interviewed 4 or 5 on camera, which was pretty good, and a few others off camera. I literally spent an entire day interviewing the people that live on the streets of Knoxville. And overall, they seem really lost, really hopeless. Kind of interesting because it's actually one of the better places to be homeless if you consider that the entry-level jobs, what they pay, how much people need workers here, how affordable housing is here, all that. It isn't the most difficult package in America, but the people are hopeless. So there's something missing in the environment, and I don't know what it is. The one thing I've noticed about people in Eastern Tennessee is that, for the most part, they are very talkative, and that's why I stayed an entire day meeting people up there. They're very talkative, and they seem to be, at face value, some of the nicest people to deal with as far as, like, just conversationally wise, you know. They'll talk to you. They'll have great conversations. So if you're a talkative social person, the people here really are not afraid to open up and get into topics that other people probably wouldn't want to. So it's a great city for socializing and meeting people in that aspect. So it is not like a closed off place where people just won't talk to you. It seems like, from my experiences, Eastern Tennessee is very similar to Florida, where people are actually willing to talk about stuff. And I like good conversation, and it seems like people here are really willing to do that. But with that also comes that there's no filter, and sometimes you can get offended by some of the things people say. But then again, that's just part of the package, that people here don't seem to have a filter. They'll really get in depth and have some interesting conversations. There's nothing to hide in Eastern Tennessee. People are very open. So industry-wise, there's a lot of good things regionally going on for Knoxville, but specifically in Knoxville, there ain't too much. So it's one of those places where if you have the right edge on the economy, you could do all right. But if not, if you're just kind of fading into the background, don't really have any talents, I can see how it can be difficult. And a lot of people have told me that they've kind of got stuck in Knoxville, where they can't find jobs, they can't really make it, they're trying to make it and they're struggling. It hasn't gone too well economically for them. But I see people that have a little bit more ability, maybe self-employed or just better schooling, better talents, better job experiences, and are able to get those better jobs. You know, it isn't the poorest place in America. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's not the best, it's not the worst. And your personal qualifications will make a huge difference on where you're going to land in Knoxville. But overall, I wouldn't worry about jobs here unless you're very unskilled. Then you're just definitely going to fall into the fold. I feel like Knoxville is the type of place that what you bring to the table makes a huge difference. And while a lot of people that are here find no opportunities, a lot of people that move here find the opportunities because that's what their mindset is anyways. It's kind of like what Joe Dirt said, you know, it's like home the way you make it down there. Would I move to Knoxville? It's an interesting question. You know, if I was buying a house, maybe if I needed affordability. Now, if I was older, disabled, limited income, just couldn't afford Florida, I guess it would be a viable option. Now, this homeless camp area maybe like 2 years ago. You can see that over the last year, homelessness has just quadrupled in Knoxville. So this is what that homeless area looked like before. It's got worse. You know, the notion that Knoxville was affordable has kind of turned it into a landfill of people who can't afford other places. And that has actually made it unaffordable and has made the job place more competitive. So it's almost understandable how sometimes the locals could feel like this isn't the best situation for them. So again, if you're ending up in Knoxville, perhaps if you're on a limited income and have very few options, it would be a more affordable place for you. But if you're just in the middle of life and you're trying to have a future ahead of you, it would be very narrow-sighted to end up here. So if you're disabled, older, and just limited income-wise, like fixed income type people, I guess in those types of situations, Knoxville would make sense. But if you're young, perhaps a place like Chattanooga would be a better option, would have more opportunities. I wouldn't recommend it to a young person. It seems like the young people that are here already are really stuck. I mean, the addiction, the homelessness, and the mindset of desperation. It's almost sad that so many people who've ended up here have almost been dumped here, not out of the fact, oh, I want to live in Knoxville, but hey, I don't have a lot of options anywhere else. So not to be offensive, but Knoxville isn't exactly the first choice of anybody moving. It's kind of like you don't have too many other options. And for most people who are moving that are a little bit more young with families and better means, you probably don't want to end up in the city limits of Knoxville. There's a lot of great suburbs to choose, predominantly on the southern or southwest side of the city down there. And if you go further to the east, there's great suburbs there. So when you start to talk about the Knoxville area, then a lot better options start to show up. I mean, Gatlinburg, you have a lot of options out there. Places that are a little bit more fun, So I'm not knocking the Knoxville area, but I'm just giving you guys an overview of the types of situations that bring people to end up in Knoxville. For some people, like those looking for the outdoors, that end up in the outer outskirts, outer suburbs, it could definitely be a different story. So you just got to keep in mind that there are people who are able to make the package of Knoxville work for their advantage. But if you're an ambitious young person, there's probably something better out there for you. This is the United States of America. You can make a living anywhere, and you can make the best out of any situation. I just wonder why for so many people, Knoxville has been kind of a last resort type situation, and then they end up getting into like a deep depression spell here. But again, there's also people that end up in the outskirts, end up in the suburbs, and they seem to do pretty well. Especially those people who make advantage of, the outdoors, which is probably the best thing this area has going for it. I personally like the weather in Tennessee. It's not too cold, it's not too warm, it's kind of perfectly in the middle. The mountains, for me, are just great, but not everybody feels the same way. For some people, it just prolongs the depression. Talking about depression, I hope you like gray skies and rainy days, because the mood here with the weather, while comfortable, it sure feels kind of like a gray day here is more common than Florida. So that may be another aspect you may not have even thought about. Like you start your day off in Florida, you go outside, boom, blue skies, boom, blue skies. It seems like here in Tennessee, you get a lot more cloudy, overcast days. And perhaps that's why a lot of people struggle with depression here. It may just be the overcast days. A lot of people don't put too much thought into that, but the amount of days that are sunny definitely make a difference. In this part of the country, doesn't have the most sunny days. So again, that could be a contributing factor into the depression aspect of this area. But I think if you understand it's not Miami, it's not Las Vegas, it's not a glittery place, it's not full of nightlife. If you are okay with a lot of rainy, overcast days, if you just want to slow life down a whole lot, Knoxville could actually work for you very well. I guess you would have to be the type of individual who is a slower pace and not exactly overwhelmed by not a lot of anything to do. If you're just the type of person content with a good view like this, watching the seasons change and enjoy mild weather, and you don't really require the nightlife of Miami or Hialeah, then I guess Knoxville, Tennessee could work for you. There are a lot of great suburbs and surrounding smaller cities to consider, but traffic can be a nightmare, especially heading south into Chattanooga. Again, geographical limitations of the mountains, so choose your location carefully. Devote some time trying to figure out exactly what part of Knoxville you need to be in or want to be in, because overall, there are some geographical boundaries, traffic congestion in certain directions, and that could definitely put a damper on your dream of a peaceful mountain town. And even if your Knoxville story is a happy one, you better be prepared to meet people whose Knoxville experience hasn't been the best. Homelessness is rampant here. It's among the worst of any city on the East Coast. Means on a daily basis, you're going to see people panhandling, needy, hungry, and desperate just to have basic necessities. So, if you're okay with being in an environment like that and seeing that every single day, I know where I live here in Bradenton, Florida, I see a lot of homelessness. Has my life led me to their situation? No, it's given me the opportunity to be kind and generous to other people whose life hasn't been as easy as mine. That's at least the way I look at the homeless situation in Bradenton where I live, which is probably not even as bad as Knoxville. If you've got kids and family and teenage and adolescents, I would think very long and hard about how they're going to deal with an environment like this. If your children are going to get married young, you think, and start a life, the affordability of this place can definitely make it successful for them while challenging elsewhere. Not that you should try to give your kids the easiest package in life. That never creates the strongest people. The strongest people always come from the hardest situations. So if you have kids and families and you really want to provide them with a good foundation, think long and hard about the Knoxville decision. Your kids are going to go to school with kids whose parents are living a different life. So even if you're doing everything right at home, the kids that are going to go to school with your kids at home, they have a different domestic situation than yours. So think long and hard if you have kids. I think this decision's a lot easier if you're older, retired, looking for affordability. But if you have kids and families to think for, you better think long and hard. Obviously, you heard the sentiments of the locals on minorities. So if you're Hispanic, Asian, or somebody of a background like that, that's how a lot of people are going to feel about you, and they're not really going to treat you with dignity and respect. So if you're a minority, an outsider, you're going to deal with that from a lot of people. So if you're from a different background, probably isn't the most welcoming place. Seems like Chattanooga's got more diversity in more neighborhoods, so maybe people there are more open-minded outsiders, but it seems like Knoxville, I mean, they don't even like people from other states, so how do you think they're going to feel about somebody from a different country? So that's unfortunately the way people think of outsiders here in Eastern Tennessee. It's a very unfortunate situation, and well, I hope you guys liked today's video. Those are my thoughts on moving to Knoxville. I think it's an easier decision if you're elderly, but if you're young or have kids and families, definitely a much tougher situation. Now, with my experience of moving to Alabama for affordability, I learned that this type of environment isn't conducive for children because despite the fact life may be easier on you for providing purposes for them, it's the association with people who are coming from a background of not trying hard enough, of settling for less, domestic situations. So now you're putting your family around people who just have lower expectations, and that may not be what you're doing. It's definitely a downgrade of a situation. And it's sad to say this, but a lot of people that live here think that you're moving to Knoxville because it's better. They think you're upgrading to something better, and they think wherever you come from is worse because that's the narrative and spin that's been put on this issue. But it's sad that the people in Knoxville don't realize that you're actually downgrading into Knoxville. So if you're moving from Florida, New York, it's a downgrade. It's more dangerous. It's less incomes. There's a reason why houses are worth less here. It's a downgrade. But to the locals that live here, they don't really understand that you're downgrading into something more affordable. They think that you're actually with money moving somewhere better. And it's sad that that's the narrative and spin that's been put on this situation of people moving to Eastern Tennessee. The locals don't get that, and the people that move there don't really convey the message properly of why they ended up there. A lot of times resentment, a lot of times they believe the narrative they want to believe. But just so you know, it is in a lot of ways a downgrade. it will be an economical relief to you. But you're trading in money for safety, respect, and dignity, and that is something difficult to wrap your head around. There's a lot of things analytically about Eastern Tennessee that are not really appealing. Like I said, some of the highest overdose death rates in the country. Addiction here is rampant. Violence is a thing in Tennessee. Tennessee's always been among the most violent states. So you're definitely probably changing some safety concerns there for the worse. And let's not forget, people here smoke a lot. It's just bad habits and little things like that that mount to, if you're coming from a cleaner, more sane background, when you end up here, you're going to find it's kind of a little bit less standards. Interestingly, the people here are going to think that they're more wholesome than wherever you're coming from. And with their arrogant attitudes of, like we've seen here with some of these locals, your patience may run really thin. And that's kind of what happened to me in Alabama, where it's like eventually I was like, okay, I've tried to believe this narrative. I try to believe this is for my economy, affordability, and for my future, but it's not. It's a place where you're downgrading into. And if you're looking for affordability, age, limitations, and stuff like that, it may be good for you to downgrade. But if you're young and have a future in front of you, you better keep looking for something better that will probably be more expensive, to be honest, because things cost what they cost for a reason. Lo barato sale caro. This place is cheap for a reason. I hope you guys like my review of Knoxville, Tennessee. Overall, it's a city I enjoy going to, and every time I go here, I take time not just to look at the mountains and stuff like that, but actually talk to the people. The first time I went to Knoxville, we bought food for the homeless. You can watch that video on our YouTube channel. And on the second trip, we interviewed 4 homeless people on the streets of Knoxville. So I've got a lot of perspective. Actually, no, we interviewed 6 people because there's 3 people in that one interview. So I've taken a lot of time to meet people on the streets, and those are the ones we did on camera. There's people I've met off camera who didn't want to be on video. So I've gotten a pretty good feel for the area and the struggle of the people in Eastern Tennessee into Appalachia. I do feel like the people here are more sociable, and that's why I've enjoyed being in this area, because you can get really down and gritty and really understand what people are thinking. There's no filter, and I love that aspect of communication where I can get from people how they actually feel, similar to Florida. So I think in the social aspect of it, that is similar to Florida. But I think the biggest question mark after my last trip is Knoxville's got so expensive that you're almost better off paying a few $100s more a month. I don't know if you can Uber drive, if you can do something extra to make work some extra hours, get a part-time job. I don't know what you can do. But I think it's gotten so expensive on the renting side that if you're renting, you might as well be somewhere better. It seems like this is more a place for somebody buying or somebody just looking for that affordability, and that's it. With the increasing cost of living, it really is a question mark to me. It's like, well, it isn't that much more affordable. Like, is $400 less in rent really worth downgrading my entire life to living in Knoxville when I can live in a beach town in Florida? I would rather work for $400 more and live somewhere better. But that's my mentality. There's always a person that says, how can I save a penny left and right? And they downgrade themselves into absolute misery because they refuse to work for what they want. Me, I still think it's worth staying out of a place like Knoxville, because now, if it was $1,000 less, maybe, but not for $400 less. And that's a thing that right now, cost of living in Knoxville has increased to the point where it doesn't make sense for affordability anymore. Unless you're buying, I will say that. If you're buying, it's different. But again, if you're buying, wouldn't you want to rent there first and get acclimated with the place? Versus moving somewhere you've never been to and investing in a place you've never been to can come with a lot of complications. I learned that the hard way in Alabama. I personally am not going to buy property anywhere unless I've lived there first for a while and make sure I like the area. It seems like a lot of commitment and a lot of investment. You tie up everything you got into a move, and then you got to hope it works because you got your whole life invested into it. But if you're renting and it doesn't work out, you can always move to the next town. So if you're moving just for affordability purposes, I would still make the recommendation of trying out the area first. A mistake that I've made personally, I hope you never make that mistake yourself. That's Knoxville, Tennessee. it's a fun town, good mountains, good things to do, always interesting people to talk to, but definitely changing for the worse.